At 35, Lady Alara Vance was a masterpiece, gathering dust in a gallery no one visited. Society had labelled her a spinster, a relic of a bygone season, her future deemed as settled and grey as a London winter. They whispered that her wit was too sharp, her mind too keen, and her years too many for any respectable lord to consider. But they hadn't accounted for him. Julian Croft, the new Earl of Atherley, impossibly young, devastatingly handsome, and burdened by a title far too heavy for his 24 years. He saw not a spinster, but a queen, and in the heart of a London season that thrived on gossip and ruin, he would risk everything to declare her his destiny. The year of our Lord 1821 was, for Lady Alara Vance, no different from the 10 that had preceded it. It was another London season she was obliged to attend, a spectral presence haunting the edges of ballrooms, shimmering with the buoyant hopes of girls 15 years her junior. At 35, she was not merely on the shelf. She was, in the cruel parlance of the ton, the very cabinet in which the shelf was housed. Her spinsterhood was a quiet, settled thing, a cloak she had woven for herself, thread by thread. First, there was the long illness of her father, the scholarly Baron Vance, to whom she had been a devoted nurse and intellectual companion until his passing. Then came the management of their moderately indebted estate, a task her younger brother, Thomas, happily relinquished. But the truest thread was a wound from a decade past, a brief, glittering courtship with a viscount who had praised her mind in private, only to mock her bookish severity in public, before marrying a simpering heiress. After that, Alara had retreated. Her beauty, a subtle, intelligent grace that resided in her knowing grey eyes, and the elegant line of her jaw, had become invisible to men seeking blushing, biddable brides. Tonight it was the annual Blackwood Ball, the pinnacle of the season. Alara stood near a Doric column, the crimson silk of her gown a stark contrast to the pale pastels of the debutantes. She watched the whirl of colour and listened to the familiar cadence of the orchestra, a wry, melancholic smile playing on her lips. She was a scholar of society now, not a participant. They look like frantic butterflies, do they not? The voice, a rich baritone laced with an unexpected amusement, startled her. She turned to find a young man leaning against the adjacent column. He was tall, with a cascade of dark chestnut hair that brushed the high collar of his coat, and eyes the colour of moss after a rain. He was impossibly, achingly young, and yet his gaze held a weariness that belied his years. Alara recognized him instantly. Julian Croft, the new Earl of Atherley, a comet streaking through their predictable firmament. His father and older brother had been lost in a yachting accident off the Isle of Wight a mere 6 months prior, catapulting him from a carefree second son into one of the most powerful and eligible peers in the realm. Butterflies, perhaps, Alara replied, her voice calm and even, or moths, drawn to the same dozen glittering flames. She gestured subtly with her fan towards the circle of young ladies surrounding the Duke of Clarence. A genuine laugh escaped him, a sound so out of place with his sombre reputation that it turned several heads. Aptly put, my lady. Moths, and the flames care little which of them gets singed. He straightened up, executing a perfect, respectful bow. Lord Atherley, Julian Croft. Lady Alara Vance. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition. Daughter of Baron Reginald Vance, the classicist? Ilara's composure, her most steadfast shield, faltered for a fraction of a second. No one had associated her with her father's academic passions in years, the very same. My father held his translation of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations as the finest in the English language, Julian said, his voice filled with a surprising earnestness. He said Baron Vance didn't just translate the words, he translated the man's soul. A warmth spread through Ilara's chest, so unfamiliar it was almost painful. "Thank you, my lord." That would have meant a great deal to him. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, an oasis of stillness in the swirling room. He wasn't looking at the blushing debutantes who were now casting speculative, hopeful glances his way. He was looking at her, truly looking. "Why are you not dancing, Lady Elara?" he asked, his question devoid of the usual pity she received. It was a simple, direct inquiry. "I believe my dancing card has been misplaced," she said, the polite fiction she had used for a decade. "Permanently." He smiled, a slow, captivating thing that transformed his serious face. "Then may I be so bold as to help you find it? Beginning with the next waltz?" The audacity of it sent a ripple through the matrons watching from their gilt chairs. The Earl of Ortherley, the prize of the season, asking the 35-year-old spinster to dance? Elara felt a blush, a ghost from her youth, rise to her cheeks. Her first instinct, born of years of self-preservation, was to refuse, to retreat to her column and her comfortable invisibility. But then she met his eyes. They were not filled with pity or condescension. They were filled with genuine curiosity and an intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of time, seeing not the spinster, but the woman beneath. "I would be honored, Lord Atherley," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. As he led her onto the floor, a hush fell over the immediate vicinity, followed by a frantic rustling of fans and a flurry of whispers. For the first time in over 10 years, Elara Vance was the center of attention, and as Lord Atherley's hand settled firmly on the small of her back and he guided her into the graceful turns of the waltz, she felt a terrifying, exhilarating sensation. She felt seen. The whispers that began at the Blackwood ball did not fade with the morning mist. They coalesced into a storm of gossip that swept through the drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs of Mayfair. The young Earl of Atherley had not only danced with the Vance spinster, he had danced with her twice, and had then spent a full half-hour engaged in animated conversation with her near the potted palms, utterly ignoring the hopeful glances of Miss Isabella Sterling, the season's acclaimed diamond. Elara expected it to be a fleeting anomaly, a young man's whim. She retreated to her modest townhouse, prepared for the furor to die down. It did not. 2 days later, a footman from Atherley House delivered a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a first edition of Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, bound in worn green leather. Tucked within was a note, penned in a strong, decisive hand. "Lady Elara, I recalled your father's work and thought you might appreciate a fellow Stoic. I find their perspective on enduring the frivolities of life most applicable. I will be riding in Hyde Park at noon. Should you be taking the air, I would be honored to accompany you. Yours, Atherley." It was a blatant invitation, a public declaration of interest. Her younger brother, Thomas, a good-natured but feckless man more interested in his tailor than his sister's welfare, was bewildered. "Atherley? But he's a boy, and an earl. What could he possibly want with you?" "Intellectual conversation, perhaps," Elara had replied dryly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She went. Escorted by her long-suffering companion, Mrs. Gable, she entered Hyde Park to find the Earl already there, mounted on a magnificent black stallion that seemed to thrum with the same restless energy as its rider. He dismounted immediately, his eyes lighting up upon seeing her. Their promenade along the Serpentine was a public spectacle. Every carriage that passed slowed, its occupants peering out with unconcealed curiosity. Lord Atherley was oblivious, or perhaps he simply did not care. He spoke not of hunting or horses or the latest political scandal, but of philosophy, of the burden of unexpected responsibility, of feeling like an actor in a play for which he had not learned the lines. My father and brother, they were born for this, he confided, his voice low as they paused to watch the swans. They understood the intricate dance of alliances, the subtle threats, the weight of 1,000 years of Croft history. I was meant for a library at Cambridge, perhaps a quiet life as a country scholar. Now I am the pillar, and I fear I am made of sandstone, not marble. Elara found herself responding, not with practiced social niceties, but with genuine empathy. Marble can be cold and brittle, my lord. Sandstone is shaped by time and pressure. It endures. He stopped and turned to her, his gaze so intense it seemed to burn away the 11-year gap between them. You see, that is why I sought you out. You speak the truth, not just the pleasantries. Their meetings became a regular, scandalous feature of the season. He called at her townhouse for tea, shocking Mrs. Gable by staying for 2 hours to debate Plato in the dusty library. He sent her a rare orchid from his hothouse, accompanied by a note dissecting the Latin nomenclature. He escorted her to a lecture on ancient Roman architecture at the Royal Academy. This was not a courtship of flirtatious glances and whispered sweet nothings over lemonade. It was a meeting of minds, a fierce and sudden recognition of a kindred spirit. For Julian, Elara was an anchor in a sea of sycophants. She challenged his ideas, laughed at his moments of pomposity, and listened with an attentiveness that made him feel more understood than he had in his entire life. He was not just an Earl to her, he was Julian. For Elara, the attention was both intoxicating and terrifying. The cynical protective shell she had built around her heart began to crack. She found herself anticipating his visits, her mind sparking to life in their debates. She felt a reawakening of emotions she had long since buried, a dangerous, youthful fluttering in her chest. But with this reawakening came a gnawing fear. In the merciless light of day, she saw the reality. He was 24, the future of a great house, with a duty to marry a young, fertile bride and produce heirs. She was 35, a woman past her prime, unable to offer him the one thing his title demanded. This, she told herself, was an intellectual friendship, an indulgence he would soon tire of before moving on to his proper duties. The Ton, however, saw it differently. They saw a naive young Earl being ensnared by a cunning, desperate spinster. The whispers grew louder and crueler. She's a fortune hunter. She's using his grief to trap him. It's unnatural. The architect of the most virulent opposition was Julian's own mother, the formidable Dowager Countess of Atherley, Lady Beatrice Croft. A woman forged in the crucible of high society, she saw Elara Vance not as a person, but as a catastrophic impediment to her family's legacy. And she was not a woman to let an impediment stand in her way. Lady Beatrice Croft did not deign to visit Elara's modest townhouse. Instead, she summoned her. The note was brief, imperious, and written on thick cream stationery bearing the Atherley crest. It requested Lady Elara's presence at Atherley House the following afternoon at 3. It was not a request. It was a royal command. Elara went, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She knew what was coming. Atherley House was a palace of marble and gilt, designed to intimidate, and the Dowager Countess, seated on a throne-like chair in the center of a vast, cheerless drawing room, was its undisputed queen. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her spine as rigid as her principles. "Lady Alara," she began, without any preamble of tea or pleasantries, "I am a woman who values directness. This association between you and my son must end." Alara inclined her head, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My lady, the Earl and I enjoy a friendship based on shared intellectual pursuits." Lady Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humour. "Do not insult my intelligence. A friendship that has made you the subject of every gossip column in London? A friendship that has my son, the Earl of Atherley, neglecting his duties to every eligible young lady in the kingdom to dally with. You." The unspoken words, an old spinster, hung in the air between them. "My son is young," the Countess continued, her voice like chipping ice. "He is still reeling from his grief. He is impressionable. You, on the other hand, are a woman of 35. You know precisely what you are doing. You are preying on his vulnerability for your own gain." The accusation, so close to the whisper she had heard, struck Alara like a physical blow. "That is untrue. I have never asked for anything from your son. You have asked for his attention, his time, his public regard. You are making him a laughing stock. An earl has responsibilities, Lady Alara, the first of which is to marry well, to secure the succession, a task for which you are, forgive my frankness, ill-suited." Every word was a calculated strike, aimed at Alara's deepest insecurities, her age, her modest fortune, her childless status. She felt the blood drain from her face, but she held the Countess's gaze. "What Lord Atherley does is his own choice," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. "Then you will force me to help him make the correct one. Cease your correspondence. Refuse his visits. If you have any sense of honor, you will remove yourself from his life, for his sake." The interview was over. Alara walked out of Atherley House, the dowager's words echoing in her mind. They were cruel, but were they untrue? Was she being selfish, clinging to this unexpected joy at the expense of Julian's future? That evening was Lady Danbury's annual masquerade, an event Julian had insisted they attend. He would meet her there. Alara resolved to go, but only to tell him it was over. She would invent a headache, a sudden need to visit the country. She would perform the necessary surgery, cutting him out of her life to save him from the infection of her reputation. She found him by the French doors leading to the terrace, magnificent in a coat of midnight blue, a simple black domino mask failing to conceal the intensity of his eyes. "Alara," he said, his voice warm as he took her hand, "I was afraid you would not come." "Julian, we must talk," she began, her own voice strained. We cannot continue this." Before she could explain, Miss Isabella Sterling, dressed as a diamond-encrusted fairy queen, glided over, flanked by two of her simpering friends. "Lord Atherley," Miss Sterling purred, ignoring Alara completely. "Mamma was just saying how you have been neglecting your duties. There are so many young ladies who would be thrilled to have your attention." One of her companions giggled. Indeed, one must be careful not to waste one's time on last season's fashions. The jibe was aimed squarely at Alara, as sharp and pointed as a stiletto. Julian's posture stiffened, a muscle feathered in his jaw. "My time is my own to invest, Miss Sterling, and I find I prefer vintages with substance to new pressings that are all fizz and no flavour." The insult was so direct, so publicly delivered, that Miss Sterling gasped, her face turning a blotchy red. Several people nearby fell silent, turning to watch the unfolding drama. This was the moment, the confirmation of all the dowager's warnings. Alara saw the scandal erupting, Julian's name being dragged through the mud for defending her. "Please, my lord, do not," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "It is not worth it." "Not worth it?" He turned to her, his eyes blazing. He seemed to look past her, at the sea of masked, judgmental faces watching them. He saw the whispers, the sneers, the casual cruelty of their world. And in that moment, something within him snapped. He took Elara's hand, raised it to his lips, and then turned to face the room. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried with the clear, ringing authority of an earl. "You all whisper and you wonder," he began, his gaze sweeping across the stunned onlookers. "You speculate about my affairs and my duties. So allow me to be clear, to put an end to all your pathetic little games." He drew Elara closer to his side, his arm circling her waist in a gesture of unmistakable possession and protection. "This woman," he declared, his voice resonating with a passion that silenced the orchestra, "Lady Elara Vance is not a passing fancy. She is not a dalliance born of grief. She is the finest, most intelligent, most honorable soul I have ever known." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he delivered the final, irrevocable blow to convention. "You may call her a spinster. You may whisper about her age. I do not care. To me, she is, and always will be, my destiny." He ripped off his mask, his face bare and resolute. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a deafening vacuum where 1,000 social rules had just been shattered. Then, a collective gasp. The scandal was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Elara stood frozen in the circle of his arm, her carefully constructed world lying in ruins around her, terrified, and, to her own profound shock, soaring. The aftermath of Julian's declaration was immediate and brutal. The Tun was scandalized not just by the content of his speech, but by its flagrant breach of etiquette. One did not air such personal matters in public. One certainly did not elevate a 35-year-old spinster to the status of a fated beloved, effectively insulting every eligible debutante and their ambitious mammas in the process. Lady Beatrice was apoplectic. She confined Julian to Atherley House for 2 days, a futile gesture as he was a grown man and an earl, but one that demonstrated the depths of her fury. Their arguments were said to be so loud they could be heard in the mews. When he finally emerged, he came straight to Elara's townhouse. She met him in the library, her face pale, the dark circles under her eyes a testament to sleepless nights. "Julian, what have you done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You have ruined yourself for my sake." "I have liberated myself," he countered, taking her hands. His own eyes were alight with a feverish conviction. "For too long, I have allowed the title to rule me. No more. We will face this together." "There is no we," she insisted, pulling her hands away. "Your mother was right. I am a danger to you, to your future. This must end." "Did my mother speak to you?" he asked, his voice hardening. Elara hesitated, then nodded. "She was direct and correct. You need an heir, Julian, a young wife, a dynasty." "I need a partner," he exclaimed, his frustration evident. "I need a companion with whom I can share my thoughts, not just my bed. I need you. Can you not see that?" Before she could answer, the doors to the library burst open. It was Lady Beatrice herself, her face a mask of cold fury. She had not waited to be announced. "So, this is where you run to," she said, her eyes fixed on her son. "To the epicenter of your own ruin." She then turned her glacial gaze upon Elara. "I warned you, madam. I told you to stay away." "Mother, "You will not speak to Lady Alara in that tone," Julian warned, stepping between them. "I will speak as I see fit. I am trying to save our family from your catastrophic sentimentality," she retorted. She held up a small, exquisitely painted portrait miniature of Miss Isabella Sterling. "Lord and Lady Sterling are still, miraculously, willing to overlook your public humiliation of their daughter. I have arranged a dinner. You will be there. You will apologize to Isabella, and you will begin a proper courtship." "I will not," Julian said flatly. "You will," his mother shot back. "Or have you forgotten the state of the Atherley finances? Your father and brother were not merely yachtsmen, Julian. They were gamblers. The estate is laden with debt. A match with Isabella Sterling and her immense dowry is not just advantageous, it is essential. It is the only thing that will keep us from ruin." The revelation struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. Financial trouble. It explained the dowager's desperation, and it gave a vile new credence to the whispers that she, Alara, was a fortune hunter. She could almost see the narrative solidifying in Lady Beatrice's mind, the impoverished spinster, sinking her claws into a wealthy but indebted Earl. "Is this true?" Alara asked Julian, her voice barely a whisper. Julian looked pained. "The finances are complicated, but it is my problem to solve, not yours to worry about." "It is now the core of the problem," his mother interjected. "Do you see, Lady Alara, your little romance is not just a social embarrassment. It is a financial catastrophe. Are you so selfish that you would see this great house, this ancient line, sold off piece by piece to satisfy your vanity?" It was then that another visitor was announced, a man whose presence turned the tense scene into something far more poisonous. Lord Harrington. Richard Fleming, Viscount Harrington, was a man in his early 40s, handsome in a predatory way, with cold, calculating eyes. He was the man who, 10 years ago, had courted Alara, praised her wit, and then, upon discovering the modest size of her dowry, had dropped her without a word and married another. He had been the source of her first, most profound heartbreak. He sauntered into the room, a smug smile on his face. "My dear Lady Beatrice, what a pleasure. Atherley, Lady Alara. You look surprised to see me." "Harrington, what are you doing here?" Julian demanded, his tone hostile. "I came to offer my condolences to Lady Alara," Harrington said, his eyes glinting with malice as they roved over her. "It must be so difficult, being the subject of such vicious gossip. I felt it my duty, as an old acquaintance, to offer my support." His presence, his saccharine words were a deliberate torment. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was reminding her of her past humiliation, positioning himself as a figure from the history she couldn't escape. Lady Beatrice seized the opportunity. "Lord Harrington, a man of sense. Perhaps you can talk some into my son." "Oh, I have tried," Harrington said smoothly. "But youth is ever impetuous. He does not see the trap he is walking into." He looked directly at Alara. "Some women have a talent for ensnaring men far above their station. It is a pity when a man's grief makes him blind to such manipulations." The insult was clear, the implication monstrous. He was painting her as a practiced predator. Julian took a threatening step forward, but Alara put her hand on his arm, stopping him. Her own heart was a maelstrom of old pain and new fury. She looked from the dowager's unforgiving face to Harrington's cruel smirk. They were a united front, representing society, duty, and her own painful past. They were twisting this beautiful, unexpected connection with Julian into something sordid and ugly, and the most terrible part was their arguments, stripped of their venom, made a twisted kind of sense. She was the wrong choice. She was the path to his ruin. With a heart colder and heavier than it had ever been, she looked at Julian, the fire in his eyes, begging her to fight alongside him. And she knew what she had to do. She had to save him from herself. Enough. Ilara's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the toxic atmosphere in the library like a shard of glass. All three of them, Julian, his mother, and Lord Harrington, turned to look at her. The trembling had ceased, replaced by a chilling, brittle composure. "Lady Beatrice," Ilara said, addressing the dowager with formal iciness, "you are right. My presence in your son's life is causing irreparable damage to his reputation, and, it now seems, his financial security. That was never my intention." Julian's face fell. "Ilara, no. Don't listen to them." She ignored him, her gaze remaining fixed on his mother. "Lord Harrington," she continued, turning her head slowly, "thank you for your timely reminder of my place in the world. Your memory is as impeccable as your manners." The sarcasm was so fine, so sharp, that Harrington actually took a step back, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. Finally, she turned to Julian. The look she gave him was one of profound, heart-breaking sorrow. "My lord," she said, reverting to the formal address, "this has been a stimulating diversion. But it must end. Your mother is correct. You have duties to attend to, a future to secure." "A diversion?" Julian repeated, his voice laced with disbelief and hurt. "Is that what this was to you? A diversion?" "What else could it be?" she asked, forcing a cool, dismissive tone she did not feel. Each word was a betrayal of her own heart, a self-inflicted wound. "An Earl and a spinster? It is the stuff of fanciful novels, not real life. I am 35 years old, Lord Atherley. I am a realist. I allowed myself to be flattered by your attention, and for that I apologize." She was playing the part they had assigned her, the calculating, world-weary woman. It was the only way to make the break clean, to force him away for his own good. Julian stared at her, his face a canvas of confusion and pain. He could not reconcile the woman standing before him, cool and distant, with the warm, brilliant companion he had come to know. "I don't believe you," he whispered. Lady Beatrice, however, was triumphant. She saw her victory at hand. "You see, Julian? The lady has come to her senses. Now let us go. Lord Harrington, we are in your debt." As his mother took his arm to lead him away, Julian pulled free. He took one last, desperate look at Ilara. "Is this truly what you want?" For a single, agonizing moment, her resolve wavered. She wanted to scream the truth, that she was doing this because she was starting to fall in love with him, that the thought of being the cause of his downfall was more than she could bear. But she saw Harrington's smug grin, the dowager's hawkish expression, and she knew she could not falter. She gave him a small, empty smile. "I want a quiet life, my lord. Something you, it seems, are incapable of providing. Goodbye." It was the cruelest thing she had ever said. And it worked. The light in his eyes died, replaced by a shuttered, wounded pride. He gave a stiff, formal bow, turned on his heel, and walked out of the room, his mother sweeping out behind him like a conquering general. Lord Harrington lingered for a moment. "Well played, Ilara," he murmured, his voice low and insidious. "Always knew you were a survivor. A pity you couldn't land this one. He was a very big fish." Ilara didn't grace him with a response. She simply stood, frozen, until the sound of his carriage wheels faded into the London street noise. Only then did she allow her body to fold, sinking into the nearest chair, the silence of the library pressing in on her. The victory she had just handed them felt exactly like defeat. In the days that followed, a miserable, rain-soaked quiet descended on Ilara's life. She refused all visitors and instructed her servants to turn away any messengers from Atherley House. True to his word, Harrington and his allies began a systematic campaign to destroy what was left of her reputation. The whispers were no longer just about her age or her pursuit of the Earl. They became darker, more vicious. Stories, completely fabricated, began to circulate. A rumor that she had been deeply in debt and had targeted Atherley from the moment his father died. Another, even more poisonous, hinted at a string of past indiscretions, painting her not as a spinster, but as a woman of loose morals who had cleverly hidden her past. Harrington used his influence to have thinly veiled, malicious caricatures of her published in the society scandal sheets. A gaunt, desperate woman casting a net over a cherubic young Earl. Ilara endured it all in stony silence, her only comfort the stoic philosophers Julian had reintroduced her to. But their words on enduring hardship rang hollow when the hardship was a void of her own making. Every waking moment was filled with the memory of Julian's hurt face, a wound she had inflicted to prevent a greater one. She had chosen loneliness as an act of love, and the sacrifice was consuming her. Meanwhile, Julian was being paraded through the season by his mother. He was seen at the opera in the Sterling's box. He was witnessed dancing a stilted quadrille with Isabella. He was a ghost at the feast, his face grim, his manner withdrawn. He was fulfilling his duty, just as Ilara had told him to, and every report of his compliance was another twist of the knife in her heart. She had won. She had saved him, and it had cost her everything. Julian Croft was drowning. He was drowning in his mother's ambitions, in the simpering inanity of Isabella Sterling's conversation, and in the cold, echoing silence left by Ilara. He went through the motions, the dinners, the balls, the requisite appearances, but his mind and spirit were elsewhere, trapped in the memory of a dusty library and conversation that felt like coming home. He did not believe Ilara's dismissal. He had seen the flash of pain in her eyes before the mask of indifference fell. He knew her too well. Her words were a shield, but he did not know what she was protecting, herself or him. His suspicions grew as the whispers against her intensified. The stories were too vile, too specific. This was not idle gossip. This was a targeted assassination of her character. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, who was behind it. Lord Harrington. The man's smug satisfaction that day in Ilara's library had been the look of a predator closing in on its prey. Driven by a cold fury, Julian decided to stop playing the part of the dutiful son. He was the Earl of Atherley, and it was time he wielded the power of that title. He began his own quiet investigation. He used his wealth not for cards and horses, but to pay informants. He spent evenings in the smoky back rooms of gentlemen's clubs, not drinking, but listening. It did not take long to uncover the truth. He found a disgruntled former valet of Harrington's, who, for a hefty sum, was more than willing to speak. The valet confirmed everything. Harrington harbored a decade-long grudge against Ilara. He had been incensed that the woman he had so casually discarded had captured the attention of the most eligible bachelor in London. His pride was wounded, and his response was to destroy her. He had paid journalists for the scandal sheets, spread lies among his gambling partners, and coached Isabella Sterling's friends on what barbs to throw. Armed with this knowledge, Julian's next stop was not Ilara's home, but his own solicitor's office. He spent a full day with his financial ledgers, the grim reality of his father's debts laid bare. The situation was dire, but not, he discovered, hopeless. His father had made one very shrewd, very secret investment in a shipping company in Bristol. It was a long-term venture, not yet paying dividends, but the principle was sound. If managed correctly, it could restore the Atherley fortune within 5 years. It would require austerity, careful management, and the selling of some outlying properties. It would not require Isabella Sterling's dowry. His path was now clear. It was a path of defiance. He found Lord Harrington at their shared club, White's, holding court by the fireplace. Julian approached him, his demeanour quiet, his eyes like chips of ice. "Harrington," he said, his voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. "A word. In private." Sensing a confrontation, Harrington smirked and followed him to a secluded card room. "Getting tired of your spinster already, Atherley?" Harrington began. Julian didn't waste time with insults. He laid a small, leather-bound journal on the table. "This is the sworn testimony of your former valet, Silas Webb. It details, with dates and names, every slander you have initiated against Lady Alara Vance. It also includes a fascinating account of your own, less than honourable financial dealings." Harrington's face went pale. "Furthermore," Julian continued, his voice dangerously soft, "I have had my solicitor draw up a document. It is a formal accusation of slander and defamation of character. If I file this, every newspaper in London will have the story by morning. You will be a social pariah. Given your precarious credit with the banks, I imagine public ruin would be followed swiftly by financial ruin." "You wouldn't dare," Harrington hissed. "Try me," Julian replied, his gaze unwavering. "You will cease this campaign immediately. You will issue a public retraction, couched as a misunderstanding. You will never speak Lady Alara's name again, and you will offer her a formal, written apology. If you fail to do any of these things by the end of the week, I will destroy you. Am I understood?" Harrington, trapped and exposed, could only nod, his face a mask of impotent rage. Julian's second duel was with his mother. He found her in the drawing-room, planning the menu for yet another dinner with the Sterlings. "Mother, there will be no dinner," he said, placing a stack of financial papers on the table in front of her. "I have spent the last 2 days with the solicitors. The debt is manageable. I will be selling the Scottish hunting lodge and the property in Kent. We will live more modestly for a time, but the Atherley line is in no danger of ruin." Lady Beatrice stared at the papers, then at her son. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning is that your primary argument against my union with Lady Alara is now void. I do not need the Sterling dowry. I will not be blackmailed into a loveless marriage to save a fortune that does not need saving." "This is not just about money," she cried, her composure finally cracking. "It is about propriety, about heirs. She is 35, Julian. And I am 24, he thundered, his own control breaking. "And for the first time in my life, I have found a person who sees me, Julian Croft, not the Earl of Atherley. A woman whose mind is as beautiful as her soul. I would rather have 5 years with a woman I love and respect than 50 with a simpering child who agrees with everything I say. You speak of duty and legacy. My duty is to be a good man, and my legacy will be that I refuse to sacrifice my happiness on the altar of your prejudice." He softened his tone, his anger giving way to a raw plea. "Mother, I love her. Truly, is that not worth anything to you?" Lady Beatrice looked at her son, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time since his father's death. She saw not the impressionable boy she thought she was manipulating, but a man of conviction, of passion, and of unshakable resolve. He was his father's son in a way she hadn't recognized before. She saw that she had lost. She did not concede, not with words, but her silence was a language of its own. Julian knew he had won the battles, but the war was not over. The final, most important fight was for Ilara's heart. He had to convince her to trust him, to believe that their love was not a path to ruin, but a fortress they could build together, and he knew just the place to make his final stand. The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood were hosting their final ball of the season. It was where everything had begun, and it was where he would settle their destiny once and for all. Elara had no intention of attending the final Blackwood ball. To her, the season was over. She was a ghost, and it was time to fade back into the countryside and the comfortable obscurity of her father's library. But a summons arrived that she could not ignore. It was from the Duchess of Blackwood herself, a woman of immense grace and quiet power, whom Elara had always admired from afar. The note was personal, handwritten, and it simply said, "My dear Elara, your presence is requested. Do not hide your light. Eleanor." To refuse a personal request from the Duchess was unthinkable. And so, with a sense of grim finality, Elara donned a gown of deep sapphire velvet, a color that spoke of twilight, not dawn. She felt like a condemned prisoner walking to her own execution. The ballroom would be a theater of her humiliation, filled with the very people who had feasted on the gossip Harrington had served them. As she entered the magnificent ballroom, a hush fell, just as it had that first night. But this time, it was not one of surprise. It was one of morbid curiosity. The wolves were waiting to see the wounded prey. She held her head high, her back straight, her expression a perfect mask of serene indifference, even as her stomach churned with anxiety. She saw Julian almost immediately. He stood near the orchestra, not speaking to anyone, his eyes scanning the crowd. When his gaze found hers, the world seemed to stop. The intensity, the longing, the sheer force of his will seemed to reach across the room and hold her fast. He started towards her, a man on a mission. But he was intercepted. Lord Harrington, his face pale and tight with fury, blocked his path. Harrington had, as commanded, issued a weak retraction and a painfully formal, insincere apology note to Elara, but his public humiliation burned, and he could not resist one final, venomous strike. He strode past Julian and stopped directly in front of Elara, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Lady Elara, a surprise to see you out. I had heard you had retired from the world, having failed to land your prize." His words were a public slap in the face, designed to provoke, to create a scene that would forever cement her as a desperate failure. A collective gasp went through the room. This was it, the final act of her social execution. Before Julian could react, before a duel could be challenged or fists could fly, Elara spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was as clear and cold as a winter bell. "Lord Harrington," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Some of us measure our lives in books read, kindnesses offered, and truths understood. You, it seems, measure yours only in prizes won and lost. It must be a terribly empty way to live." It was a perfect, devastating riposte, turning his own avaricious worldview back on him. Harrington was left momentarily speechless, his cruelty exposed as pathetic. At that moment, Julian was at her side. He didn't even glance at Harrington. He had eyes only for Elara. He took her hand, his touch warm and firm. "He is not worth your breath, my love," Julian said, the term of endearment spoken clearly and deliberately for all to hear. He then turned, not to Harrington, but to the assembled cream of London society, his voice ringing with passion and authority. For weeks, you have all feasted on gossip and lies. You have passed judgment on a woman whose character is worth more than all of your titles and fortunes combined. You condemned what you didn't understand. But I understand. He turned back to Elara, his moss-green eyes shimmering with emotion. He dropped to one knee. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. An Earl on his knee in the middle of the Blackwood ballroom. It was an act of such profound, tradition-shattering sincerity that no one dared breathe. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice shaking slightly but filled with utter conviction. "I have loved you from the moment I heard you speak. You are my intellectual equal, my spiritual compass, and the only woman who has ever made me feel whole. They say I am too young. They say you are too old. They are fools. Time is meaningless when a soul recognizes its counterpart." He pulled a small, velvet box from his coat pocket. Inside was not a gaudy diamond, but a simple gold ring, set with a single deep blue sapphire that matched her gown. It was an ancient Roman signet ring from his family's collection. "I do not offer you a silly girl's diamond," he said. "I offer you a piece of history, a symbol of endurance, of timelessness. I offer you my name, my heart, my devotion, and my life. I know the world is against us. I know they will talk. Let them. Our world will be in our library, in our conversations, in the life we build together, far from their petty whispers. Marry me, Elara. Be my countess. Be my wife. Be my destiny, fulfilled." Tears were streaming down Elara's face, washing away the years of loneliness, of heartbreak, of resignation. She looked at this beautiful, brave young man kneeling before her, offering her not just a title, but a partnership she had never dared to dream of. He had fought for her. He had duelled with his mother, with her past, with society itself. He had seen her, and he had chosen her, not in secret, but in front of the entire world. The whispers, the stares, the judgment of the ton. It all faded away until there was only his earnest, hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, the word a fragile, wondrous thing. "Oh, Julian. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and as he stood, the ballroom, after a moment of stunned silence, did something extraordinary. Led by the Duchess of Blackwood, who began to clap with a broad, approving smile, the room broke into a wave of applause. They were not just applauding a proposal, they were applauding courage. They were applauding a love so powerful it had rewritten their unwritten rules. Julian Croft, the youngest Earl, kissed his future bride, the woman they had called a spinster, and in that kiss they sealed not a scandal, but a legend. And so, Lady Elara Vance, the woman society had written off at 35, became the Countess of Atherley. Theirs was not a story of a woman saved by a man, but of two souls who recognized each other across the divides of age and expectation. They faced the whispers and the challenges together, their bond forged not in the ballrooms, but in the quiet respect of their shared library. Julian's mother, the dowager, eventually came to admire her daughter-in-law's fierce intellect and stabilizing influence on her son, their peace a testament to Elara's grace. Their love story became a quiet legend in the annals of the ton, a powerful reminder that true destiny isn't about finding a person who fits the world's mold, but about finding the one who helps you build a world of your own. If this story of a love that defied all convention touched your heart, please show your support. Click the like button, share this video with someone who loves a timeless romance, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove love is the greatest adventure of all. Thank you for listening. See you next time.